I spent 2 decades as a Fortune 500 head of HR sitting in the rooms where promotions were decided. I'm Courtney O'Connell, and I'm bringing you inside the promotion room. Today, Lisa Williams joins me inside the promotion room. Lisa has over 20 years in executive leadership at Deloitte. We discuss interview advice, our personal pet peeves for when junior people would get time on our calendars, and how you can avoid those exact pitfalls. We talk about personal branding at work and what we're really talking about behind closed doors. We also talk about what execs are really looking for in the next generation of leaders. A lot of good learnings in this one, so let's hit it. Lisa, welcome to the promotion room.
Thank you, Courtney. I'm thrilled to be with you.
Well, I'm thrilled you're here, and it's your birthday. So happy birthday. By the time this airs, the birthday will be long gone, but we celebrate in the moment. So happy birthday to you, my friend.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'd love to learn from you. Where are you from, and what did you want to be when you were a little girl?
Gosh. Okay. So first I grew up in Long Island. And in terms of what I wanted to be, this was a really tough one for me. And I think I sort of stumbled my way through it. I'm not sure that I had a dream job other than thinking I would be a beautician, maybe.
Why a beautician? What do you think it was that was pulling you in that direction?
I think I just always loved hair and makeup, and it felt easy. Like it felt like it was organic and you would talk to people. So that was something that I had thought about, but never pursued.
Yeah. So what was your first job?
Okay. My first job out of college was working at a financial institution where they put me in what they called specialized collections. So I was working with people who hadn't paid their bill. Maybe it was an accident. But it was the first thing that put me out in the public, like having to do a lot of outreach and build relationship with people to get to an outcome.
What did you study in school?
I was an English major. I mean, I was all over the place, Courtney.
Listen, but I love it, right? We have diverse interests, and this is why I love having these personal conversations on the pod, because I think it's just so interesting to hear that even senior executives who've made their way to the top of the heap in the corporate space had beginnings that could be a little bit like strange and chaotic, and not everybody walks right into the career path that they end up in. So here is a young girl from Long Island who wants to be a beautician, who ends up studying English and working at a bank in collections. Okay. So tell us about that collections job, because that is not easy to do.
It really wasn't. What I would say is I've worked with a group of lovely human beings. And so for a first job out of school, you can't ask for better than that, to be surrounded by people who are willing to teach, train, give you the tips of the trade, and just generally support you as friends. So that in itself was a gift. What I didn't love it so much, and eventually transitioned out into more service-oriented work. But it was an important start, I think. And there's always new awareness and growth in anything that we do.
Yeah. Yeah. I always have been a firm believer that we learn more by adversities. And again, sometimes we've got big A adversities, stuff that actually is hard. And then other times we have little a adversities, which are, I'm in a job that I really don't like, and this doesn't feel like what I'm meant to be doing. And we've got to listen to that and figure out our next step. So give us kind of the cliff notes of your resume from there. So you're in the bank, you're doing collections, you're feeling that voice that's saying, this is not lighting me up. Don't think I want to, I'm looking at my bosses here, and is that a job I want? Probably not. So talk us through your career from there.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of floundering, to be honest. The notion that I did not want to do that long term was very clear. And I ended up applying to one of their management development programs, which was life-changing for me. I really had to push myself in the way that I interviewed for the program, because there was only a select number of spots. I think I actually interviewed twice before I got in. And that gave me an opportunity to really do all of this rotational work throughout the bank, where I realized, this is not the right path, but now I see what is, right? So to your point, I think you've got to hit those things. And also, I do think there is a little bit of trial and error for anybody as they go out. I think the majority of people that I interact with are doing things early on in their career because people tell them it's a great, stable field, right?
Yeah.
You'll have paychecks and you can count on income and they'll always need that. And then they get to mid-career and they realize, like, I don't know how I got here and I never wanted to do this.
Yeah. That is the story of so many people. And hence, what I am trying to impart through these conversations for folks who are on the earlier end of their career, maybe mid career, to kind of hear that this is normal and that's okay. I want to go back to something that you mentioned about the interview prep, how you had to really think about how you were interviewing for this particular job. There are a lot of people on the market right now. We know that there have been a lot of layoffs, so a lot of people interviewing. And we've got people who are just very proactive about their careers and are identifying their next step. So tell us a little bit about that particular situation and what you learned from it.
Yeah, it required a lot of prep. I think sometimes we go into interviews being a little flip, like, we know ourselves better than we think we do until we're asked the question that really forces us to go deep. And so, what I would say is learning about myself and being able to crisply articulate what it is that I wanted and why.
Mm,
Right. The why was really what they were looking for. Why you and why now? Why this? And so being able to answer those was, I think, what got me over the hump.
mm,
But that required a lot of self reflection and even just some rehearsal in saying it to make sure that when I delivered it, it had impact and it also had heart. It had
yeah.
meaning. Yeah.
Yeah. I was coaching somebody a little while ago on interview prep. This is somebody who's mid career, real go getter, super smart and sharp. And we were doing some interview prep, some mock interview questions. And I asked him the mock question, why do you want the job? Why do you want this job? Why now? And the answer was, I want it because I really want the experience in this area and I want to learn this or that and the other thing. And it was like, nope, stop right there, wrong answer. So this is, I think, what you're nodding to is this self-reflection that we do have to go deeper. And we also have to understand the dynamic of an interview where you're trying to position yourself as the no-brainer choice for this role. And you and I, coming from HR, you and I have done a lot of interviewing. And so this feels obvious to us. My client was like, this was like a light bulb moment. My coaching was you want to make your answer about the business unit and the value you're going to bring to the business unit. So why do you want it? Well, I excel at these things and you need that. And I know that I can come in day one and start making an impact here. And this is how I learn. This is how I'm curious, right? So really showing them the coachability, the self awareness, the depth of thinking. So I think that that's a great point to make
Yeah.
around interview prep.
I mean, because at heart, what you're really talking about is sales. And to be honest, it is one of the things that people feel the most icky about, right?
Yeah.
I think the moment that we feel like we're starting to brag about achievements can feel uncomfortable, especially if that's not our go to in
Yeah.
how we operate day to day.
Yeah.
But it is clear and it doesn't have to feel icky, right? Because to your point, what you're doing is you're presenting a solution to an
Mm,
issue that they have, right? There's a reason that they're hiring. There's either a skill set that's missing or it's sheer manpower.
yeah.
And look, maybe the answer that they offered you initially, that might fly in a market that doesn't have a labor market that's flooded with
Mm,
talented professionals. But when you're in something now where there's so many people who are seeking work who could easily do the same job, you have to make yourself memorable
yeah.
and you have to be clear about how do you distinguish your skill set to
Yeah.
your point to why you are the no-brainer choice.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to come back to this because this is that we can go really deep around this, and I think it's really relevant. But I do want to go back because I brought us on a rabbit hole for a second. Back to your career path. So you're in the bank, you're in the management development program. Where tell us about just kind of the highlights of your career from there.
Yeah. So I realized the thing that I wanted to be doing was to move into human resources. I was super fascinated by it. And what was different about a financial institution than professional services, where I ultimately ended up in consulting services, is it was sort of like the location on the third floor behind the closed door that nobody walked into unless you were HR. And so it was not possible for me to like permeate that barrier. So I actually had to leave the institution to go make my path. But it was okay because I already had vision. And so once I entered that, I went into consulting services. My first leader was wonderful. She said, you have the operations and the analytics. I'll teach you the rest, right? Which was the most gracious offer in my career because it's what set me on path.
Hmm.
And it taught me so much. So having worked in different organizations, I worked in 3 different consulting organizations. And what I would say is moving around was very important to me, right? I knew I loved the culture of the organizations, but I also knew I needed to keep refining my skills, which is part of the story that I tell about myself and my work. It is not being afraid to morph yourself, right? And thinking about where your skills transfer to or what you haven't yet learned that you want to. And those are the things that led me forward. So I did it all. I did recruiting. I did generalist work. I did employee relations when that was still part of the generalist role. I did compensation work, right? You touch all of the things and then you see what's really important to you. And ultimately what I realized about myself was coaching and leadership and learning and development were really passion points of mine. And that's what led me to where I am today.
I love it. So you said this notion of morphing yourself and being open to following your where your interest is leading you. I'm wondering how you morph yourself without losing yourself.
Oh, I mean, what an interesting question, Courtney. I think it is being willing to embrace what's forward instead of trying so hard to hold on to what's behind. Now,
Mhm.
I say that, but the things that you always carry with you inherently are your set of values. When you're really clear on who you are and what your values are, you can't take that away from you in any setting unless you allow that to happen. Right.
Mhm.
And we know when we're misaligned because we feel friction in our life, right? We
Mhm.
feel friction in a situation or a relationship. So that becomes very clear. I will say many people think they know what their values are, but when they go to put them on paper, they realize, oh no, I actually am not sure. Or you give them the list, right? The set of values, and you ask them to pick 5 or 10 and they want to pick
Mhm.
30, right? And
Mhm.
so it's that effort of really like getting really clear on what are my top values. And then once you've got that, there's no way that you can rip that away, right? So I
Mhm.
think you are you in every situation of your life. But
Mhm.
it is a willingness to embrace what is uncomfortable, which just the other day I was in a session where we were talking about stop, start, continue. And one of the things that I said I wanted to continue was putting myself in uncomfortable situations because that's where the growth is, right? Walking into a room full of people where I don't know anybody and a willingness to just sit down at the table and remind myself, I'm going to learn something here today and I belong here.
Mhm.
But that's it.
The idea of values is really interesting and one that I personally never considered until probably into my 40s and where I started feeling a little bit of friction in my own career and it was like what is this about? Tell us a little bit how values played a part in your climb in corporate.
Yeah, I will say I am much like you, Courtney. So there are pieces that I think were inherently there, but I hadn't yet identified them or called them out, right? It wasn't
Mhm.
until recently that I had done a real big values exercise myself. But I would say the things that were always there were integrity. I once had somebody tell me that I was very deliberate in what I did, which I want to say maybe translates to intentionality. And I think to lead with heart. So for me, that talked about as I became a leader in different spaces, showing up with empathy, showing up with kindness, a willingness to teach others, to train others, to let go of all of the control. And those I think are not so simple for a lot of us, right?
Yeah.
It is stepping in. And I had a client last week who came to the realization that if I don't allow my team to do this, number one, I'm injuring them and I am perhaps offending them that they're not capable, right?
Mhm.
But I'm also hurting myself because I can't do the things that I was hired to do in this role because I'm doing their job instead.
Right.
And that's a choice, right? That
Yeah.
was a choice for her.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So when you were in corporate, I am curious about how deliberate or not you were about seeking out mentors and sponsors because you were deliberate about your climb. You were making strategic moves in order to get the experience that you knew that you needed. So tell us about how intentional you were or not, because sometimes we just get lucky and people are mentoring us because we're in the right place at the right time with the right relationships. And other times, this is something that we have to deliberately seek out. So, where did you fall on that?
yeah, I will say it was recommended that we take a mentor. So that was the first sort of prod. But I will say I followed through. And the funny thing is, we just set up another call. But my mentor has been a longtime friend and mentor to me since like 1998. So she's been instrumental in my life, whether it was simply showing up and supporting me, answering questions because she was more senior in the organization,
Mm.
offering perspective on things or from rooms that I didn't yet have access to. And in some cases, just validation and human companionship and being a friend, right? Sometimes it's just the person who is with you in the toughest moments. So that was very deliberate. And then to pay it forward, I have mentored a series of people in my last firm over the years where I still have relationships, and one that's quite beautiful where I have mentored her. And now also she is reverse mentoring me many times.
Oh,
So yeah, so that came full circle.
yeah, a real symbiotic relationship there. When you think back on your career and your climb, what would you attribute your success to?
I think it was choices. I think it was very clear, even though sometimes people will try to talk you out of it. I had a lot of times where people would say, you're really comfortable, you're really good at this. Why would you switch from what you're doing? And sometimes it's the ability to turn those voices off, right? Because it's easy to let fear seize us. It was always like following if I felt bored, right? And then I would tell myself, like, could I see myself doing this for another 20 years or another 30 years or wherever I was in my career? And if the answer was no, or, and this is a big one today, could this work go away? And then I become unnecessary. And so that becomes a really more focused choice for people, I think, today, especially in the world of AI, in the world of transformations and reorganizations, right, where roles can easily go away. Be clear about who you are, what your transferable skills are, and what is it that I next want? And not the old question that people ask, right? Oh, where do you see yourself 5 years from now or 10 years from now? Well, guess what? We don't know what the world is going to look like 5 years from now anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's as simple as, what do you think the next step might be? And what are the steps to get there?
How do you recommend people even get clarity around that? I think a lot of people are like, I just don't know. I don't know. How do we get people 2 steps forward on that?
Yeah. So that I would say that was like the number one question from my clients, particularly when I was internal. And what we had done at the time was set up what I called an opt-in network. So literally, I think the thing that stands in the way of people getting curious with others is they think, oh, well, I can't ask Courtney for her time. She's very busy. She's not going to have time for me. So I'm not even going to ask, right? So they opt out before they've even asked the question. Here, what I did was I went out and I asked people just yes or no. How open would you be to having a career conversation? It's as simple as that one question. Well, we had a list of over 500 people who in that one day said yes. And that became, I told them, you've got a warm lead with 500 new friends here. So look over where they are, what they do, get curious, ask them deep questions, right? What's the thing you love most in your career? What do you love about what you're doing today? What do you wish you could give up? How much do you travel? What does work life look like for you? All of those intimate questions that, let's face it, you're not necessarily going to get in an interview, but you will get it from somebody sitting in the seat.
Right. And we know people love talking about themselves. And so this is the other thing. If you can get really good at asking questions, you're going to learn a lot, right? So, okay. So let's talk a little bit about this, because you and I were both senior in the corporate space. And so we were the recipients of the 15 minutes on the calendar for a junior person to pick your brain a little bit. One of my pet peeves was because I was always happy to get for someone to get on my calendar. I've made a whole business out of this. So I was very open and keen, and would be very frustrated when somebody would pop on the calendar and wait for me to lead the conversation. Now, I can, and I'm happy. I love to talk. But I deliberately wouldn't in those situations because I wanted to know what they wanted to know. Where did they want this to go? How do you suggest for the audience listening that they do this? I kind of loosely call this informational interviewing, where you're not looking for a job. You're not looking for anything from that particular person. But what you are is in hungry hippo learning mode, where you want to learn as much as you can. And when you're on the calendar of somebody senior, you're now potentially on their radar, intentionally or not. And so it's really important that you are intentional about how you walk into those conversations. So since we encourage this of people, how would you suggest they prep to make good use of that 15 minutes that they have on the calendar of an exec?
So rich. That's so rich. So one thing I will say, because you talked about your pet peeve, mine was when people would do that and then come on and ask me if I was hiring before they even got to know me, build a relationship, or tell me anything about themselves. So I would caution there. It's how you ask the question and what you say, but it's also just like we talked about before, right? This is sales. This is relationship. That's what it is at heart. So as I've worked with clients on this before, when they're getting time on an exec's calendar, there were 2 questions that I would ask. One is, what do you want to be different when you walk away from that conversation? And two is, if they could only remember one or two things about you, what is it that you want to leave with them? And very powerful, because that creates intention going in. And also, it's very clear you want to own the agenda, because to drive to those two outcomes, you have to know what you want to get out of it to going to put into it.
I love that advice. It's starting with the end in mind. So just to build on the what do you want them to know about you, is you call it sales, and it is, because it is, we are promoting ourselves. It's self-promotion. It is in kind of my own language, because I bristle with sales. I really, like, I hear sales and I shut down. So I know there are a lot of people who hear that and they're like, nope, no, thank you. I'm out. I'll stay in this job forever just to avoid having to sell. But my reframe, because what I want people to remember, we are selling every single day in every situation. We're with our partners. We're trying to sell where we really want to go for dinner tonight. We're with our friends. And so it's like we are constantly influencing our worlds. And by sheer virtue of being present in any moment, we're building a perception that people have of us, right? So this goes into the whole personal branding conversation, which I think is, we want to really get crystal clear on that, because when we think about what do I want them to remember about me, this is, what is my brand? Now, when they're behind closed doors and they're talking to their other exec peers saying, hey, Lisa got on my calendar and hey, she's dot, dot, dot. What do you want them to say? She's what, right? So I think that's exactly what I think we're saying, the exact same thing.
Yeah. And while we're there, I think just the tagline of brand can feel confusing to people, even people who have been in marketing their whole life, right? Who are surrounded by maybe branding a product. But brand to me in this context is about the experience that you create. Okay. So it is, how do you want that person to feel when you leave the conversation? What are you bringing to them in the way of presence, right? So my favorite word is back there. It's joy. Right? That is the goal of my brand, right? That people leave feeling energized or inspired, right? Or joyful from that experience. And also, to your point, when they go to their colleague and they start saying, Courtney is dot, 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 the same answer should come out when they say, what has your experience been with her, right?
Yeah.
You want those to match. The
Yeah.
answer should match if you're creating a consistent brand for yourself.
Yeah. Interesting. I have a personal story about my personal brand before I really was paying attention to how I was being perceived. And this is why I will beat this drum forever. It was mid-career, and in a team meeting, my boss was like, we're going to name Courtney our new CFO. And I'm thinking, I am certainly no finance person, so I don't know what she's talking about. And she said, Chief Fun Officer. Now, some people, maybe most people, would be like, awesome, that's so great. I'm known as the fun one. I immediately was like, oh, because in my mind, I'm thinking I'm not being taken seriously. If my boss wants to crown me Chief Fun Officer, is my brand just, she's really fun. She's a really fun person to work around. So that was the first moment in my career where it was like, okay, I want to pay attention to this. Now, I do have a tendency to overthink, so it very well could have been just let it go and have fun with it. But for me, it was an inward check-in. Am I showing up, letting people know that I also have the goods? Like, I might be fun to work with and I know my so like, we're going to get stuff done. Or am I just showing up as we're just going to have fun? So I had to be careful in that moment to really weigh out, what is my personal brand? Because if I don't pay attention to it, I might just be seen as the fun one. So I need to make sure for me, I am balancing my business acumen and my effectiveness as a businesswoman with my personality, because I am fun. I do like to have fun. I don't take myself too seriously. And I can get very serious if I need to. When I work with clients on personal branding, it's often we aren't stepping outside of our own jar to look inward to see, how are people even perceiving me? Because if we don't know how we're being perceived, we don't know how we need to grow and mold and toggle so that we can get ready for those more senior opportunities.
Yeah. And that's an important exercise too, right? What's the outside in perspective?
Yep.
I am curious, if I might just turn the question back to you. In that moment where you had a visceral reaction to CFO, the way they termed it, what did you do? How did you clarify what the intention was versus who you believed your brand to be?
Yeah. Nothing in the moment. It's the inside job This is the inside work. Okay. So like I had to show up and keep executing. I mean, I know I was good at my job. I had to continue, but it was more of the inside job where I really thought about in what rooms am I allowing myself to just be fully authentic and fun and lighthearted? And in what rooms am I making sure that my serious business side is shining through so that decision makers could trust that I had the managerial courage to tackle big stuff and difficult conversations? Because the higher you climb the ladder, the more you're faced with really tough decisions, and you have to have the courage to make the decisions and have the tough conversations. And if I was only seen as fun Courtney, I might not be building the right trust. So what I did was self-modulate and just pay attention. And I want to be clear because this was not about becoming someone else. I think a lot of people, when we talk about executive presence, think, well, I'm not charismatic, so I guess I just don't have, that's not for me. And that's not what it's about. What it's about is still being you, authentically you, and modulating where it makes sense. So I knew when I was with the board of directors, I wasn't just going to walk in and talk about this great movie I saw last night or where we could, a new bar for happy hour because I'm fun Courtney, right? I was going to go in serious and read the room. If they wanted to have small talk like that, great, I'm all in and I'm fully prepared to show up as the more polished version of myself. So that's really what it was about, was the inside job.
Yeah, beautiful. And also knowing your audience, right? That you can flex in and out of style, still being true to yourself, but to your point, to modulate in each audience what
Yep.
you need to. Yeah.
Yep. And there's a little bit of an art to that. It takes a lot of practice to read a room like that and adjust, but this is all part of the journey of professional and self-development. So, Lisa, I love talking to other HR people because, like you have been in the promotion room. This is not your first rodeo inside the promotion room. So, part of my whole mission is to demystify what we're talking about behind closed doors, because I know you and I both work with clients who are like, I'm just going to keep working harder and I'm going to execute and I'm going to take on more and I'm just going to work longer. I'm going to work longer and harder than anyone. And therefore I'm going to get tapped. And so I am curious, having been in many, many conversations throughout your corporate career where you've been with decision makers and CEOs and presidents talking about talent and succession planning and promotion planning, what do you think my audience would be most surprised to know about what we're really talking about behind closed doors?
I think there's a few things. I think there is motivation. Just because somebody works hard doesn't mean they love it. In fact, usually it doesn't marry up at all. And so people can feel that, right? If there's a disingenuous aspect to what you're doing, and you're doing it because you think you're supposed to, right? You're going after the promotion, but you haven't secured your why. Why is that important to me? What will I do once I'm there? If you can't answer those questions, people probably already know that and they're gleaning that from you in your interactions with them. So that's one of the things that I've seen come up. The other is just relative to who knows them. Sometimes we talk about like, well, it's people will say, well, it's all about who knows you, right? Like, or who I know. We'll flip it. And yes, so you can put yourself out there, but when you're not present in the room, are you memorable? Have you built, and this goes back to what we were saying earlier about relationship. Have you built relationship with people? So it's, yeah, I know Courtney. We had this great exchange, or we worked on this project together.
Yep.
So it's not.
I call those people sponsors.
Yeah.
And the sponsors, unlike a mentor, which is usually a more formalized, we understand I'm your mentor, you're my mentee. A sponsor is exactly what you're describing. These are the decision makers who are in the room, who have had experience with you in your work and who can vouch for your candidacy for a different role. And so that's exactly right. So who can sponsor you behind closed doors based on what they know about you?
Yeah. And one thing that I have noticed about that, in particular, that role, is there are named sponsors and unnamed sponsors, meaning it's not uncommon for there to be confusion around what is a mentor versus a sponsor versus a leader. And so sometimes people will say, will you be my sponsor, without articulating what the ask is behind that. So always the importance of being clear in what you want that relationship to be. But there are people who have that experience with you, right, that might be willing to have that conversation without you even asking for them to do it. And that is what I would call an unnamed sponsor.
Great. Yeah. What else?
About what goes on in the room, I think probably the one thing is people leadership. So it is one thing to be really good at what you do, right? As an individual contributor. But when you take that next step and you are responsible for leading and developing other people to be as good as what you've delivered, right? That you're sort of shepherding them forward. How are you investing in people? And how is that illustrated before you even get the seat, right? And if you were to do that 360 that you were talking about before, that outside in perspective, that it's not just top down, but it's also bottom up. So what are people's brand experience with you today who work with and for you? And I always say this, which is it is easy to lead and call yourself a leader, but who will follow you is the most important thing.
Yeah. Yep. Manager versus leader, right? Two very different roles. And one that I personally was not an easy transition for me when I got my first manager role early in my career. That was a difficult pivot for me because I was so focused on managing up that I was not bringing my team along with me. I moved fast and my communication wasn't good. I was canceling meetings with my direct reports to accommodate meetings with my bosses and decision makers, and that it was a disaster. And I got tough feedback on a 360. And it was one of those 2x4 moments like, oops, okay, I have to change how I operate. And what happens is when you're good at your job, you get promoted. And listen, I've been with multiple very large organizations, multinationals. None of them are great at training. They're just not, which is why I love what I do, because I want to be that person who can help with the pivots. And so here I got promoted from an IC to a manager because I was good at my job. And I had no idea how to be a good manager, let alone a leader at the time. And so thankfully for me, that all came to a head quickly and I could really start to grow and develop and stretch in a new way. But I was wholly unprepared for what that was. So I share all of this because I want others to not make the same missteps that I and my guests have made throughout our very long careers.
Yeah. And imparting wisdom, right? The wisdom of our own learnings. And sometimes we're still learning those lessons, right?
Always. Yeah.
Sometimes
Always.
as leaders, we still think that there's the need to do more rather than simply asking, what do you need from me? And letting somebody else tell you where they're falling short, where they need the support.
Yeah. And that's really listening, because I think a lot of us send that ladder as successfully as we have because we work really hard and we are hard chargers. But the skill of slowing down and listening is unfortunately a dying art. So that is definitely something. So on the topic of imparting wisdom, if you could pick up the phone and call 30-year-old Lisa, what would your advice to her be?
I think the thing I've learned the most is presence, and it is absolutely the hardest to do, particularly in our 24/7 world with being attached to a device at all times. But it is not worrying so much about what's ahead. And I don't mean not planning, right? That's not it. But not worrying about what's ahead and letting go of the things to which I really cannot control, so that I give the best that I have to give. I enjoy and I learn and grow from it, but I let go of the outcomes because those are the things that I can't control. And that was something that I learned when I went to coaching school. We talked about detached involvement, right? Which is, how do we allow ourselves to experience something without always needing to make sure the outcome is exactly what we planned or exactly what we expected? Well, how often does that actually happen in life? Sometimes it does, but a lot of times we end up with missed expectations and disappointments, and it's not ours to hold.
Yep.
It's
So
just not
what's the
ours to
advice?
hold.
Because I work with a lot of A types. So
Yeah.
what's the strategy to
Yeah.
let go of outcomes?
Yeah. It's surrendering. It's surrendering the outcome. And that takes patience and probably resetting our brains every single day. It is telling myself that the thing that I can control is what I put into it. But just like we can't make up somebody else's mind, right? Or we can't want something for somebody more than they want it for themselves. Letting go of that aspect of it is actually quite liberating when you allow yourself to do it. So it's to be present. It's put in the piece that you can, and then it requires some level of peace. Maybe it's replacing behaviors. Maybe it's, once I've done everything that I can, closing it and walking away. It's not perseverating and checking for answers every 5 minutes, right? Like people tell me, I keep looking at my email, I keep refreshing. How is that serving you?
Yeah. Yeah. And it is, in some ways, these are boundaries, right? They're kind of emotional, energetic boundaries. And so if that's your advice to your 30-year-old self, I wish I had the same advice. So can you call 30-year-old Courtney as well and tell her to just relax? Everything is going to be okay.
Even if it doesn't look like you originally intended, right? That you can trust that you will figure it out, that
Yeah.
there's always another way. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Lisa, thank you. This was a great conversation, and thank you for your pearls of wisdom and your perspective. It was a pleasure. Thank you for joining me inside the promotion room.
Thank you, Courtney, for the joy. I appreciate it so much.
Thanks for joining me inside the promotion room, and be sure to follow the show so you never miss an episode. Cheers to your success.